I remember very clearly the day of the presentation of the Guards banner to the 5th Guards Regiment. The regiment, lined up for the solemn acceptance of the Guards banner, froze. In the line I saw courageous pilots, navigators, gunners, radiators, hard-working technicians and gunners, and with pain in my heart did not find many of those who I knew in the regiment, with whom I had met before, talked after their combat flights. There were no squadron commanders P.F. Emanuk G.K. Believ, Navigator I.D. Eaglesky, and many others. Navigator A. Fay, Tolmashev I noticed on the right flank. He had already become the navigator of the regiment, a major. On his chest he had the Order of Lenin and the Order of the Red Banner. Our eyes met. I remembered how I thanked him for his service, and he answered me so simply, "I am like everyone else in our regiment." And when after the solemn honouring of heroes I tried to ask him about combat flights, he, avoiding the story of himself, all talked about combat comrades, the commander gunner radiator who had time to open fire before the enemy. This time there were many pilots and gunner radiators unfamiliar to me in the formation. They came to replace those who laid down their heads in the battles for the motherland, winning for their comrades the right to carry forward the Guards banner. And this banner is awarded for courage in battles, for boundless devotion to military duty. Some of the pilots who I knew in the first months of the war have already become commanders of squadrons. Many of them have battle orders on their chests. It was they who, by their exploits, won the regiment the rank of Guards. Presenting the regiment commander, hero of the Soviet Union N. Tokarev Guards banner, I say, in the memory of the people will forever live heroic feats of our combat friends who gave their lives for the motherland. Your military feats, performed in the days of the difficult struggle against fascism for the honour and independence of our fatherland, will also live forever in the hearts of the grateful people. The enemy is still strong. He continues to tear deep into our country. It is hard for us, but we firmly believe that the victory over the evil enemy will come. Your selflessness in military affairs is a contribution to the coming victory. Taking the Guards banner, D.I. Tokarev was as worried as I was. I saw and felt how deeply he perceived this joyful event. When the regiment commander, together with the Commissar Arkady Zabezhansky, knelt down to say the oath, the whole regiment followed their example, kneeling before the banner. It was a majestic and touching celebration. Repeating the words of the oath after the illustrious commander, the regiment promised to carry with honour and dignity the Guards banner, won by the blood and lives of many battle friends, until the complete victory over the insidious enemy. I still hear the voices of hundreds of pilots, navigators, gunners and radio operators, and in my memory I remember the days and nights when the pilots of the 5th Guards Regiment made crushing blows to the enemy near Odessa, Sevastopol, near Bucharest and Ploesti. And my heart at those moments was filled with joy that I was lucky to present the Guards banner to the illustrious pilots of the Black Sea Fleet Air Force. I cannot help but tell at least briefly about the fate of the commander and commissar of the 1st Guards Aviation Regiment in the fleet. In the January days of 1943, a group of Il-4 airplanes, one of which was an air gunner, Major Arkady Zabezhansky, the deputy commander of the 5th Guards Regiment in the political part, made a strike against an enemy convoy. Zabezhansky's crew attacked the enemy destroyer guarding the transport and, having taken the enemy ship's fire, gave the rest of the planes an opportunity to make a torpedo strike. The transport sank, but the plane where Arkady Zabezhansky was, the enemies shot down. Il-4, as the participants of this operation told me, fell into the sea burning. With the Zabezhansky had to meet more than once. I still have a memory of him as a modest and at the same time very brave political officer. Talking about the combat affairs of the regiment, he never said that he also flew. There was no word I in the report. It was replaced by the words we, communists and Komsomol members of the regiment. I knew that Zabezhansky was not a member of the crew. He could not fly, but he considered it his duty to fly on combat missions, especially with those whom he brought up, whom he called for decisive and courageous actions in the fulfillment of the combat task. He flew not just as an observer. Together with the crew, he solved combat tasks and was an example of courage and high ability to fulfill combat duties for others. Arkady Zabezhansky studied in perfection the course of aerial gunnery training, qualified as an air gunner. He was a desired member of the crew for all who flew on combat missions. He was famous as an excellent air gunner. As a rule, he He tended to fly with young pilots who had no combat experience. By his mere presence in the flight, he strengthened the confidence of the novice. Commanders of many aviation units claimed that Zabezhsky was among the best political workers of the fleet aviation. The fact that it was so is confirmed even now. Meeting with those who knew Arkady Zabezhansky, I hear kind and warm words about him. A. Tokarev in 1944 became a Major General of Aviation Division Commander. He was tireless in the fight against the hated enemy, which was already at that time retreating. Leaving our towns and villages under the blows of the Red Army, the fascists carried out the tactics of scorched earth, took Soviet people into slavery. Regiments of the Mine Torpedo Division were based in the areas liberated from Hitler's invaders. Nikolai Alexandrovich could not calmly listen to the stories of the Soviet people, who managed to escape from the fascists, about all the torments and sufferings they endured during their stay in the fascist occupation. Tokarev and his pilots did not know fatigue in combat flights. They found satisfaction in the fact that they repaid the enemy for his atrocities committed on our land. Tokarev did not stop flying, and when he became a division commander, a general, he passed his rich combat experience to his subordinates, participated in the performance of all complex tasks, was the leader in these operations. In March 1944, while bombing the enemy transport, Tokarev's airplane was hit, and burning fell on the outskirts of Yevpatoria. But again, let's return to Sevastopol in 1942. At dawn on June 30, the enemy resumed attacks along the entire front, dealing the main blow on the Balaklava Highway in the direction of Kulikov Field and on the railway station. At the Chersonese airfield, the Air Force Rifle Battalion, which was in reserve of the SOR, received replenishment. By the evening of June 30, Major General Vivivili Ermachenkov informed the leadership of the 3rd Special Air Group that the Supreme High Command, at the request of Vice Admiral LFSOS, Oktyabrsky, allowed the SOR Command to leave Sevastopol. By the evening of June 30, 13 minesweepers, 4 tugboats, 3 patrol boats and 2 diving boats, which took the wounded and evacuees, left for Novorossiysk. The same evening, 18 airplanes flew from the Chersonese airfield to Anapa, each airplane having taken on board the flight crew, left with a big overload. Trains at the airfield in the Kaponias stood 3 Ye. The first belonged to the commander of the Air Force of the Black Sea Fleet, General V.V. Yermoshenko, who considered it his duty to fly among the last. The second, Lieutenant Colonel M.A. Normov, and the third, the squadron commander, Major K.D. Denisov. Konstantin Denisov commanded a fighter squadron and then an air regiment from the first days of the war. During the defense of Sevastopol 73 times, he led his squadron to attack the enemy, personally shot down 13 enemy planes in air battles. In group battles with his participation, 6 enemy machines were shot down. On the Caucasian airfields that night, 16 Lai-2s flew out, but only 13 landed at the Chersonese airfield. 3 planes, having lost orientation due to engine malfunctions, returned to the Caucasian coast. The landing of the Lai-2s took place in difficult conditions. A large number of fighters and commanders from the retreating units and subdivisions had accumulated near the airfield. Many of them knew that transport planes every night took away the wounded, and now they would take evacuees, and everyone hoped to get on a transport plane. The Lai-2s landed at 15-20-minute intervals. Unloading of delivered ammunition and food was fast. Boxes with shells and mines were sometimes immediately loaded into cars and taken to the batteries. In all, about 24 tons of ammunition and 2 tons of food were delivered during the night from June 30 to July 1. On the return flight, the planes took that night 232 command and flight technical personnel and 49 wounded. All planes reached the Caucasian airfields safely. The commander of the Lai-2 crew, Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Semyonovich Skrilnikov, who arrived on June 30 at the Chersonese airfield among the first, quickly unloaded but did not receive the order to take passengers. Skrilnikov was ordered to drive up to the Kapanar and the crew to take refuge in the shelter. In 1968, I met Mikhail Semyonovich Skrilnikov. He continues to fly even now. He remembers that last night at the Chersonese airfield very well. Several times, after the crew hid in the shelter, Skrilnikov went to the airfield duty officer, asking permission to take people and fly away. Skrilnikov recalls how nervous he and the entire crew were from the unknown. There were no Lai-2s left on the airfield. I listened with interest to Mikhail Semyonovich's story about his courageous crew, with whom he was flying at that time. Skrilinikov spoke with great love about the flight mechanic Arkady Kudyshin, the second pilot Sasha Kurimov, the radio operator Masha Chekirova. Apparently, this combat team was marvelous. Skrilnikov's crew made 538 sorties to besieged Leningrad, hundreds of sorties to the rear of the enemy. 3 cans of tinned fish and a flask of fresh water were saved. But by the evening of the first day, they ate the first can of tinned fish. On the second day, the second and the third. On the third day of being at sea, it became clear that there was no point in rowing, as we would not reach the Caucasian coast, especially as 2 men could not row any more. One was wounded, the other weakened. We decided to lie down, not to move, and not to talk in order to use less energy. For the first 7 days, the feeling of hunger was very strong. Then it began to diminish, but all thoughts and all conversations were still limited to food. We drank all the water we had in 2 days. The thirst was very severe, and to reduce it we wet our head, chest and face with seawater. This somewhat alleviated the suffering. On the 3rd day we began to try seawater. At first it seemed very disgusting, we could not drink it. We only rinsed our mouths. Then we began to swallow 1-2 sips, and the 5th day we already drank seawater, got used to it, and in the future each drank about 2 flasks a day. One day P.I. Yeresko found Pantacid tablets. 1 tablet thrown into a flask of seawater reduced its salinity and unpleasant taste. On days when it rained, they collected rainwater and drank it with great pleasure. Pavel Ivanovich describes the state of mind of his comrades. Alexander Potamushnevich was characterized by increased nervous excitability. On the 16th day he had hallucinations. He saw food, sat in the canteen. It seemed to him that all those sitting there were given lunch, but he was not offered it. He was screaming, indignant. For the last 2 days of his life, he continued to have hallucinations and delusions. He died on the 19th day of fasting in unconsciousness. Alexander Mikhailov was calm, balanced. His wound would not heal. Constant dressings with seawater did not give any healing effect. He was fully conscious all the time. A few minutes before his death, he said that he was going to die, said goodbye, asked Yeresko, if he remained alive, to write to his mother about his sufferings. He died on the 24th day. Semyon Popov, too, was characterized by a quiet nature. He quickly developed mental retardation. He answered questions sluggishly, reluctantly. He always spent a lot of time thinking. On the 24th day hallucinations appeared. He saw food, even held it in his hands, and chewed it as if he had actually eaten. He died on the 30th day. At first I calmly expected that we would be picked up by our ships. Then, seeing no salvation, I began to feel painfully worried about my situation. The forces held on for a long time. I did not allow the thought that I would die, and was always sure that I will be seen or the dinghy nailed to the shore. Visual and gustatory hallucinations appeared on the 30th day of fasting. I constantly saw friends bringing me water and food. Loneliness was hard to bear. I had a desire to throw myself out of the dinghy to end the suffering. However, I kept postponing it until the next day, feeling that I had enough strength for some more time. On the 36th day P.I., Yeresko returned to his homeland. During 36 days of fasting, he lost 22 kilograms of weight. He regained his normal weight in 4 months. Having recovered, Pavel Ivanovich returned to medical service in the Navy. For a long time, Pavel Ivanovich tried to eat more. Food for a long time seemed to him undersalted. The fate of the Siberian soldiers delivered to Sevastopol in the last days of June 1942 was not easy. I long and fruitlessly searched for fighters from the 142nd Rifle Brigade, and only in 1969, after the publication of the book Breakthrough, a letter came to my name in the Dostoyev publishing house. It was written by Kim Fedorovich Kusmartsev, a political officer of the 1st Battalion of the 142nd Rifle Brigade. Here is what he told. The 1st Battalion, consisting almost exclusively of Siberians, was commanded by a southerner. Captain Arakel Zakarian, the commissar, was a native of the Krasnokutsk district of the Saratov region, Vasily Gaivoronsky. The battalion commander had participated in the battles of Kasan and Kholkhin Gol. Probably, therefore, he was demanding to himself and his subordinates, taught them what they needed to know and be able to do in battle. Siberians arrived in Novorossiysk in the first days of May 1942. The brigade was assigned the task to defend the coast from Novorossiysk to On the night of June 25, the 1st Battalion was raised on combat alert. The march to Novorossiysk port quickly loaded. If on the passage to Novorossiysk they still thought and guessed where the way lies, then on board of the leader they were going to help the besieged Sevastopol. According to the reports of Sovinform Bureau, we knew that fierce fighting was going on in the Sevastopol direction. The neighbouring 2nd Battalion was raised on alert the day before. It was already in Sevastopol, where there was also the command of the brigade. Battalion where Kuzmatsev served went last. During the transition, soldier friendship united sailors with Siberian soldiers. Commissioner Tashkent Konovalov and political officer Smirnov told what they had seen the day before in Sevastopol, what they had heard from the wounded taken aboard the leader. The fighters vowed to defend Sevastopol as long as their hearts would beat. During the crossing there were several enemy air raids. Powerful ship fire and fire support of Siberians did not allow Hitlerites to drop bombs. The Siberians saw how the sea swallowed the downed U-87, saw the enemy planes leaving with a black plume of smoke. There was also a moment when the Siberians watched the torpedo going to the Tashkent, saw the trail behind it, a white storm that... But even this time the commander of the Tashkent, Vasily Nikolaevich Eroshenko, saved everyone. We were all delighted with the actions of the commander and crew, writes Kuzmatsev. Despite the fact that the lulls were short, Kim Kuzmatsev recalls how all Siberians were fed with a navy dinner. At night they moored in Kamyshavaya Bay. The battalion quickly disembarked and unloaded its equipment. A representative of the 142nd Brigade Command informed the commander and commissar where to go. Passage towards Balaklava, a height near the woods. It became the combat frontier of the 1st Battalion. Immediately began to refurbish the trenches, passages of communication. The ground was difficult. Only by dawn the battalion broke into the ground. The 2nd Battalion, which had arrived the day before, was entrenched on the right. That same night, the base trawler trawl delivered a reinforced company and ammunition for the 142nd Rifle Brigade. The enemy apparently did not anticipate that instead of scattered small groups of retreating units would meet organized opposition. I will never forget, recalls Kim Kuzmatsev, the first meeting with the Nazis. In pilots, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, they walked at full height, holding automatic rifles in their hands. Siberians met them with dignity. None of those who marched to the heights did not return. All were mowed down by fire. The enemy realized that there was a tough nut on his way. The next attacks of the enemy were supported by aviation, artillery and mortars. The fight lasted till evening. Hitlerites suffered great losses, but nowhere passed. And at Siberians the losses were considerable. At night we buried the killed. The majority of wounded, after rendering the first aid and bandages, remained in fed army. Soldiers and sergeants wrote applications for admission to the party, and some of them simply appealed to political officers and to Commissar Voronsky with a request to consider them communists. The second day was even more difficult. In the morning the enemy aircraft dropped empty iron barrels with holes drilled in them. As they fell, the sounds they made together with the sirens mounted on the airplanes created such an unimaginable howling and whistling. One's hands involuntarily rose to cover one's ears. All this was done to crush the spirit, to instill fear, but the enemy failed to shake the fortitude and selflessness, to bring confusion into the ranks of the Siberians. From the bursts of bombs and mines there was a continuous veil of dust and smoke. It even happened that tanks, not visible in the smoke, skipped through the trenches. Then bottles with flammable liquid flew after. A tank that crossed the trench did not return back. But the forces of the Siberians were melting. At night they began to withdraw to the 35th Battery. In one of the attacks, Kim Kuzmatsev was seriously wounded, and the Germans captured him. Kim Kuzmatsev had a hard way through fascist camps, but the political officer remained a faithful son of his fatherland. I was told that Ilyushev could have been among the first to get on the approaching scar, but he selflessly fulfilled his duty. When people filled the boat to the limit, Ilyushev shouted to the boat commander, "Pull back," and he himself remained on the shore. The next boat, Sk-1212, came to the surviving part of the pier and received General Novikov and the commanders who were with him. Major General P.G. Novikov was led by the bosun to the commander's cabin. The other commanders were accommodated in the cockpit and on the deck. Bulatov ordered the bosun from the NZ to feed those admitted to the boat. Zaruba did not go to the cockpit, sat on the step of the gangway leading to the bridge. Scar 1312 began to move away, gaining speed. Ivan Antonovich looked at the shore periodically illuminated by rockets. The bosun brought Ivan Antonovich, Zaruba, a can of canned food and bread. The boat was going full speed to Novorossiysk. Ivan Antonovich was still sitting on the gangway. He heard how they were talking on the bridge, trying to identify the silhouette of some ship that was signalling. Zaruba went up to the bridge, and on the moon's silvery path saw the clear silhouette of a small ship. What is he writing? Buletov asked. The signal is incomprehensible. Sk 112 continued on the same course. After a while, shots were heard from the starboard and then from the port side. Tracks of grazing large-caliber bullets became visible. On the port side from 3 points, that means 3 ships. On the starboard side from 2 points, 2 ships. In a few minutes, Zaruba distinguished the silhouettes of torpedo boats. Inletov noticed that the enemy boats go parallel courses. If you lag behind, the torpedo boats firing will hit each other, and Konstantin Pavlovich stopped the course, stopped firing, and torpedo boats continued to fire, but already hitting each other. But this maneuver was successful only in the dark, and with dawn the shelling intensified, the bow of the boat was damaged, the compartment quickly filled with overboard water. Sk 112 began to bury its nose, speed decreased. Evgeny Zetskin was helping to fix the holes. The water was pumped out, but it did not diminish much, as the overboard water was intensively coming in through numerous holes. Bullets were piercing the side of the boat. The dead and wounded were in the crowded cockpit, on the deck. One engine was out of order. Ivan Trofimenko, formerly a commander of the coastal battery, replaced the killed commander at the aft gun. From a direct hit of a shell on the German boat, there was an explosion. Fire started. On Sk 112 there were cheers of joy. Both Zedzdikin and Trofimenko remembered it. When it was completely dawn, the second engine failed. It was no longer possible to be on the bridge. 2 dead men were lying at the wheel. Another helmsman lay on his back and controlled the helm from below. Filatov, wounded in the face, in a semi-recumbent state, continued to drive the boat semi-recumbently, giving a command to the lying helmsman. When the last engine stalled, Evgeny Zedzdikin went down to the engine room. P.G. Novikov and A. D. Hatskevich were there. The wounded motorist reported to Novikov that they would go only on one motor and it was necessary to change the broken oil. Zedzdikin got involved in the work. Before serving in the Navy, he worked as a mechanic, quickly removed the oil line from the broken motor and replaced it. The boat got a move. There were no passengers on Sk 1212. Everyone was trying to do something to help the crew. They were fighting for the survivability of the ship, repairing the damage. One engine was hardly pulling the boat, which was getting more and more filled with overboard water. Scar 112 was sinking. The dead were washed away by the wave, the wounded held onto the superstructures and planks. Konstantin Pavlovich was wounded once more. With difficulty, he crawled to the aft gun and began to correct the firing. The shells ran out. Heavily wounded commandant whispered that there were shells in the forward cockpit, in the starboard side above the planking. The army commanders crawled into the forward cabin and dragged the boxes with shells. Ivan Trofimenko remembers how Colonel A.B. Migrabian crawled up to the aft gun, pushing a shell in front of him. His leg was broken. The colonel was covered in blood. Zarub was wounded in the leg below the knee, in the bone. It was impossible to stand. He sat down by the bridge. Sk 112 already had no power, but still continued to shoot back. The German gunboats did not come close. They kept firing. The U-88 arrived. At first it flew over the German torpedo boats on a strafing run, and then at a height of no more than 25-30 meters came to Sk 112 from the stern and fired on it with a machine gun. Junkers made several runs. Zedzdikin, feeding shells, received a second wound. With great difficulty bandaged his wound, but could not get up and remained lying at the silenced aft gun. The machine gun was also silent. The stern was completely submerged in water. The waves washed the deck. Who could still crawl to the bow of the boat? Ivan Antonovich saw one of the torpedo boats approaching the doomed Sk 112. What to do? There was only one cartridge left in the gun. Recall Zaruba. I thought that we would be shot at point-blank range and sunk, as it was impossible to tow the boat. And I decide, let them shoot me, I will not do it myself. The hope for life still did not fade. While the German boat was approaching, Zaruba destroyed documents, threw overboard a pistol and a watch. Hitlerites came close, threw over the gangways, ran onto the deck with machine guns in their hands. They shouted something. Zaruba crawled to the gangway. The Germans dragged him to the torpedo boat and put him on the stern. In 1970, Konstantin Pavlovich Bulatov came to visit me. He told about his last tragic campaign from Sevastopol. During the story, he had tears in his eyes more than once. I woke up, calls K-T Bulatov, when the boat lost its motion. All the ammunition was already used up. I ordered the bosun to blow up the boat, but there was no one to carry out this command. Everyone was either seriously wounded or killed. I remember someone dragged me to the German boat. Only 16 people were transferred to the torpedo boat. All those lying and sitting on the stern were covered with a tarpaulin, and removed it only with the arrival in Yalta. We saw, recalls Zevetskin, how a sanitary car came up and from the torpedo boats took out the dead and wounded Germans. Someone of ours quietly see, we killed a lot of them, and it became less painful for the defeat in an unequal battle. Bulatov regained consciousness after 24 hours. The woman who brought Balanda said, if he hadn't woken up, we would have buried him in the evening. Then prison camps. He escaped twice. The second time he crossed the front line but did not get to the Navy and served in the army in his specialty, mechanical engineer. In 1947, Bulatov was demobilized and returned to Gorky to work at the automobile plant. In 1968, Konstantin Pavlovich was awarded the Order of the Patriotic War and the Medal for the Defense of Sevastopol. Now Bulatov works as the chief designer of the automobile plant on mechanization. For successes on the labor front, he was awarded the Order of the Badge of Honor. Such is the way of a communist, a faithful son of our motherland. And Major General P.D. Genovikov suffered a tragic fate. He died in the Nazi concentration camp Flossenburg. Those who were with him in the camps told me that Pyotr Georgievich remained a loyal son of the fatherland to the end, bravely endured tortures of fascists who tried to induce the general to treason. Sent me his memories of the last days in Sevastopol, Chief of Medical Service of the 2nd Separate Division of Coastal Defense of the main base of the Black Sea Fleet, military doctor 3rd rank Ivan Stepanovich Yatmanov. In his letter S. Yatmanov writes that after the explosion of the 35th Battery, he stayed another day on the Chersonese Cape, where he met with the battery doctor E.V. Kazansky, who after the explosion of the 35th Battery, Kazansky, who after the explosion took refuge with the wounded and medical staff in the deep casemates. At dawn on July 2, Yatmanov went down to the sea. On the shore of the Chersonese Cape lay broken and burned cars, wagons, mangled guns, shells were bursting everywhere. The enemy hit the area and everywhere found victims. After many days of fierce battles with the enemy, soldiers and commanders had a tired and exhausted look. Hot, sultry days, constant tension, great expenditure of mental and physical strength, sleepless nights, and the wounded in addition, and blood loss. All this caused dehydration of the body. Fresh water was nowhere to get. They tried to drink seawater, but each time these attempts ended in nausea, vomiting, stomach upset. They used it only to gargle their throats and mouths and to wash their wounds. Yatmanov writes that he tried to restore in his memory his knowledge of fresh water production, remembered the theories of adsorption and coagulation. He poured seawater into a metal helmet, grinded 2 handfuls of dry clay, taken here on the rock, poured it into the water, stirred it thoroughly for 3-5 minutes, then let the water stand, carefully filtered it through a gauze napkin. As a result, the salty sea water turned into relatively fresh water, and it was quite drinkable. My comrades who were on the coast of Chersonesos Cape in those July days of 1942 told me more than once that the use of one doctor's experience made their fate a little easier, but no one could remember the name of the experimenter. Now we can name him. Ivan Stepanovich Yatmanov, now alive and living in the city of Yoshkar-Ola. One more story about courage of Soviet people. Major Medical Service Pavel Ivanovich Oresko with soldiers from the Marine Brigade, commanded by P.F. Gorpishenko, A. Mikhailov, A. Potamoshnevich, and S. Popov found a half-submerged ship. Popov found a half-submerged dinghy. They pumped out the water, found planks and sticks, used them instead of oars, and in the night of July 3 went to sea. They decided to keep the course to the east, to the coast of Caucasus. At dawn the boat was shelled. One shell exploded very close. Alexander Mikhailov was wounded by a shrapnel. He could neither row nor pump out water. At 2 hours 0 minutes the battery ceased to exist. None of the personnel were killed in the explosion. After some time on the approach noticed the patrol boats. The commander of the first turret, Ivan Sergeyevich Lysenko, with a group of sailors and petty officers, covered the departure of the battery personnel. Lysenko forgot the number of the boat and the name of its command. The contusion made itself known. But Alexei Yakovlevich remembers well that on the boat there was a divisional navigator, Senior Lieutenant Volkov. On the way to Novorossiysk, the boat had a fight with 2 torpedo boats of the enemy. One torpedo boat was directly hit by a 45mm gun. This cooled the fervour of the fascists, and they fell behind. There were several air raids. Hitlerites bombed and shelled the boat from cannons and machine guns. They were killed and wounded, but the crew of the patrol boat managed to fight off the enemy aviation. However, they did not have enough fuel to reach Novorossiysk, so they came to Anapa. The group of Tower Commander Lysenko continued to fight with the enemy on the day of July 2. Only at night, from July 3 to July 4, the survivors swam to the patrol boats. Among those taken to Novorossiysk was I, Lysenko. Not all the personnel of the battery managed to get to the patrol boats in those July days. Together with others who remained on the Chersonese Cape, they continued to resist. Wounded, exhausted fascists captured them. Most of the captives died in camps and prisons. Mikhail Alexeyevich Vlasov, Ivan Dmitrievich Parshin, Senior Sergeant Alexei Yakovlevich Pobivanets, Sergeant Emolai Yakovlevich Krenkin managed as a. Lysenko writes, to participate in the defeat of Nazi Germany. All of them distinguished themselves in the battles and were honoured with government awards. Scattered units of the retreating units, led by the commander of the 109th Rifle Division, Major General P.G. Novikov, the commissar of this division, Brigade Commissar A.D. Katskevich, and other commanders and political workers, continued to resist the Nazis on the Chersonese Cape. While working on the manuscript of the book Breakthrough, I did not find in the archive data about under what circumstances, with whom and on what boat P.G. Novikov left. After the book was published, I was informed about some details of those tragic days. Among those who sent me letters, former Commissar of Hydrographic Service of Sevastopol Defense Area, political officer Evgeny Anatolievich Zetskin. He still lives in Sevastopol and continues to work in hydrography of the fleet. June 30. Zetskin arrived at the 35th Battery, where there was Captain 3rd Rank N.V. Kazitsky, Deputy Chief of the Hydrographic Department of the Fleet, and simultaneously acting head of hydrography Sora. From Kazitsky, Zetskin learned that the men of the hydrographic detachment are not removed, continue to be at their posts. The commander of the detachment, Senior Lieutenant G.V. Zarubin, was missing. Zetskin undertook to check these points and went to the posts. Returning to the 35th Battery, Evgeny Anatolievich learned from Captain 3rd Rank Ilishev that N.V. Kazitsky left on a submarine to Novorossiysk. Together with sailors and petty officers from the posts of Hydrographic Detachment Zetskin, in the afternoon of July 1 repelled Hitlerites' attacks. I met with Captain of the 2nd Rank Ivan Antonovich Zaruba. I knew him during the siege of Odessa, when he commanded the cruiser Komintern. In November 1941, Zaruba took command of the cruiser Shavona Ukraina, took part in the preparation and carrying out of the landing operation in Fedosia, commanding the 1st Detachment of Transports. In this operation he showed himself a good organizer. After the completion of the Theodosia landing, Zaruba was appointed head of the Floating Means Department of the SAW. I had a chance to meet with the commander of SK 112, Konstantin Pavlovich Bulatov. I received several letters from the former adjutant of P.G. Novikov's, Ivan Petrovich Trofimenko, who served in the Navy and during the siege of Odessa was in the ranks of the 4th Volunteer Detachment of Sailors. That's when the commander of the Cavalry Division, Colonel P.G. Novikov, noticed the brave and enterprising sailor and appointed him adjutant. Comparing the letters sent to me and the stories of eyewitnesses, I found no fundamental discrepancies in their reports about the events that took place on SK 1212 from the moment of its departure from the 35th Battery. The commander of SK 112 was Senior Lieutenant Evdokim Arsenievich Korgun. His boat at the end of June was in Sochi after just completed repairs. Having received an order from the Chief of Fleet Staff, Rear Admiral Eliseev, to arrive in Novorossiysk and then proceed to Sevastopol, Kogan asked to be assigned an assistant. Lieutenant K.P. Boletov, commander of Sk-43, asked the division commissar I.F. Kardash to allow him to go to Sevastopol as assistant to the commander of Sk-112 and received his consent. From Novorossiysk he left the morning of July 1, Kogan explained to Bulater. We need to approach the moorings of the 35th Battery, take people from there and deliver them to the minesweepers, which left Novorossiysk at night to the Chersonese Cape. Then to take people on board and return to Novorossiysk. Konstantin Pavlovich told that already in the afternoon of July 1, Hitler's planes continuously not only bombed, but, having dropped bombs, shelled the patrol boats from cannons and machine guns. Vidotov remembers that Sky 1212 was going third. In front were patrol boats 29 and 46. On one of them, a bomb that exploded nearby swept away the entire upper crew, gun and machine gun crews. A signalman stood at the helm of the damaged boat, and the Scar, covered by the fire of Scar 112, continued to follow the set course to the Chersonese Cape. During the shelling, Senior Lieutenant E.A. Kogan, a brave, strong-willed commander and an excellent sailor, was killed. Lieutenant Bulatov took command of the boat. Now, fortunately, I can't remember any of the names of the boat crew, as I was together with them for one day, but in my memory they remained forever courageous, self-sacrificing, devoted to the motherland people, Konstantin Pavlovich told me at the meeting. We approached the Cape of Chersonesos in the darkness. It was difficult to orient ourselves, no buoys, no lights. We approached the berth of the 35th Battery at about 1 a.m. on July 2. Noise and shots were heard from the shore. The area where the patrol boats were located, the Germans fired artillery and mortar fire. On the night of June 30, the head of the Floating Means Department of the Sectoria, Captain 2nd Rank IA, Zaruba, received an order from the Deputy Chief of Staff of the fleet, Captain 1st Rank A.G. Vasiliev, to send all the watercraft to the Caucasus, and what could not leave on its own, to blow up. On all watercraft that were on the move, Zaruba organized the landing of the wounded and sent them to the Caucasus. The floating crane, barges and tugboat had to be sunk. There was nothing to blow them up with. Arriving at the 35th Battery on July 1, IA Zaruba found there only Captain 3rd Rank A.D. Ilitchev, who said that after midnight should come minesweepers and patrol boats, but the situation is so tense that it would be very difficult to organize the landing. Zaruba stayed on the battery. At 23 o'clock on July 1, a major from the headquarters of the 109th Rifle Division addressed Zaruba on behalf of Major General Novikov. Major General Novikov asks to help him and his commanders to get to the ship. Ivan Antonovich went to the wounded general, introduced himself to him. With Novikov was about 20 army commanders. With great difficulty, they reached the temporary pier. When they went down to it, one of the commanders kept repeating loudly, "Let the wounded General Novikov through." They crossed the plank to the second part of the pier built on consoles from rails embedded in the rock, stopped and waited for the arrival of ships. Among the commanders accompanying General Novikov was Ivan Antonovich Zaruba. He remembers that the pier was packed to capacity. Many of the wounded could not walk. Their right to be taken to the ships first was respected in that difficult situation. July 2 came. From the shore to those waiting on the pier came a multi-voiced noise, shots, bursting shells and mines in the waters of the bay. Suddenly a huge column of fire rose into the night sky, and a few seconds later an explosion rang out. It blew up one of the towers of the 35th Battery. A few minutes later there was a second explosion of the same force. The first patrol boat approached not to the second part of the pier, where General Novikov and a group of commanders were, but to the roll part of it, built directly at the shore. There was a small ripple, and the Scar bumped the bow against the pier. People immediately began to jump onto the deck, and a crowd rushed to the pier. A. Zetskin remembers this moment as follows. On the shore, where the temporary pier was built, a large crowd gathered. When the noise from the sea determined that the ships were coming, and the moon came out and helped to see the manoeuvring patrol boats, everyone was extremely excited. Some of them expressed their joy by shooting in the air and shouting at the arriving sailors. The time was after midnight. Zezgikin made his way to the pier with difficulty, but could not get through the dense crowd of people. He heard a plea to give way to the wounded General Novikov. When the first boat approached the shore, the crowd rushed towards it. Several maneuvering patrol boats were visible from the shore. Zvezkin decided that there would be no organized landing. People entered the water, some stood chest-deep in the water and called for help. They couldn't swim. Many rushed to swim to the maneuvering boats. Zvezkin took off his boots and swam toward a patrol boat approaching the cantilevered pier. The sailors pulled Evgeny Anatolievich onto the deck. He was among the first to be lifted out of the water. Zvezkin had not slept for several days and, extremely tired, he immediately went down to the forward cabin, where he was directed by the sailors, threw off his wet uniform, lay down on a vacant bunk and instantly fell asleep. And on the cantilever part of the pier were still commanders together with P.G. Novikov. Ivan Antonovich Zaruba recalls that even the second boat did not approach them, although voices were heard all the time. "Come here," received General Novikov. The second patrol boat approached the cliff, from where signals were given. It was Captain 3rd Rank Ilyashev calling the ship. At 2 hours 0 minutes, the battery ceased to exist. None of the personnel were killed in the explosion. After some time on the approach noticed the patrol boats. The commander of the first turret, Ivan Sergeyevich Lysenko, with a group of sailors and petty officers, covered the departure of the battery personnel. Lysenko forgot the number of the boat and the name of its commander. The contusion made itself known. But Alexei Yakovlevich remembers well that on the boat there was a divisional navigator, Senior Lieutenant Volk. On the way to Novorossiysk, the boat had a fight with 2 torpedo boats of the enemy. One torpedo boat was directly hit by a 45mm gun. This cooled the fervour of the fascists, and they fell behind. There were several air raids. Hitlerites bombed and shelled the boat from cannons and machine guns. They were killed and wounded, but the crew of the patrol boat managed to fight off the enemy aviation. However, they did not have enough fuel to reach Novorossiysk, so they came to Anapa. The group of Tower Commander Lysenko continued to fight with the enemy and the day of July 2. Only at night, from July 3 to July 4, the survivors swam to the patrol boats. Among those taken to Novorossiysk was I, Lysenko. Not all the personnel of the battery managed to get to the patrol boats in those July days. Together with others who remained on the Chersonese Cape, they continued to resist. Wounded, exhausted fascists captured them. Most of the captives died in camps and prisons. Mikhail Alexeyevich Vlasov, Ivan Dmitrievich Pashin, Senior Sergeant Alexei Yakovlevich Popivanets, Sergeant Amolai Yakovlevich Krenkin managed as A. Leshenko writes, to participate in the defeat of Nazi Germany. All of them distinguished themselves in the battles and were honoured with government awards. Scattered units of the retreating units, led by the commander of the 109th Rifle Division, Major General P.G. Novikov, the commissar of this division, Brigade Commissar A.D. Katskevich and other commanders and political workers, continued to resist the Nazis on the Chersonese Cape. While working on the manuscript of the book Breakthrough, I did not find in the archive data about under what circumstances, with whom and on what boat P.G. Novikov left. After the book was published, I was informed about some details of those tragic days. Among those who sent me letters, former Commissar of Hydrographic Service of Sevastopol Defense Area Political Officer Evgeny Anatolievich Zvezkin. He still lives in Sevastopol and continues to work in hydrography of the fleet. June 30. Zvezkin arrived at the 35th Battery, where there was Captain 3rd Rank N.V. Kazitsky, Deputy Chief of the Hydrographic Department of the Fleet, and simultaneously acting head of hydrography SORA. From Kazitsky, Zvezkin learned that the men of the hydrographic detachment are not removed, continue to be at their posts. The commander of the detachment, Senior Lieutenant G.V. Zerubin, was missing. Zvezkin undertook to check these points and went to the posts. Returning to the 35th Battery, Evgeny Anatolievich learned from Captain 3rd Rank Ilyachev that N.V. Kazitsky left on a submarine to Novorossiysk. Together with sailors and petty officers from the posts of Hydrographic Detachment Zvezkin, in the afternoon of July 1 repelled Hitlerites attacks. I met with Captain of the 2nd Rank, Ivan Antonovich Zaruba. I knew him during the siege of Odessa when he commanded the cruiser Komintern. In November 1941, I.A. Zaruba took command of the cruiser Chervona Ukraina, took part in the preparation and carrying out of the landing operation in Feodosia, commanding the 1st Detachment of Transports. In this operation he showed himself a good organizer. After the completion of the Theodosia landing, Zaruba was appointed head of the Floating Means Department of the SAW. I had a chance to meet with the commander of SK 1212, Konstantin Pavlovich Bulatov. I received several letters from the former adjutant of PG Novikov, Ivan Petrovich Trofimenko, who served in the Navy and during the siege of Odessa was in the ranks of the 4th Volunteer Detachment of Sailors. That's when the commander of the Cavalry Division, Colonel P.G. Novikov, noticed the brave and enterprising sailor and appointed him adjutant. Comparing the letters sent to me and the stories of eyewitnesses, I found no fundamental discrepancies in their reports about the events that took place on SK 112 from the moment of its departure from the 35th Battery. The commander of SK 112 was Senior Lieutenant Evdokim Arsenievich Korgun. His boat at the end of June was in Sochi after just completed repairs. Having received an order from the Chief of Fleet Staff, Rear Admiral Elisiv, to arrive in Novorossiysk and then proceed to Sevastopol, Korgun asked to be assigned an assistant. Lieutenant K.P. Bulatov, commander of SK 43, asked the Division Commissar I.F. Kardash to allow him to go to Sevastopol as assistant to the commander of SK 112 and received his consent. From Novorossiysk left the morning of July 1. Korgun explained to Bulatov, "We need to approach the moorings of the 35th Battery, take people from there and deliver them to the minesweepers, which left Novorossiysk at night to the Chersonese Cape, then to take people on board and return to Novorossiysk." Konstantin Pavlovich told that already in the afternoon of July 1, Hitler's planes continuously not only bombed, but, having dropped bombs, shelled the patrol boats from cannons and machine guns. Bulatov remembers that SK 1212 was going third. In front were patrol boats 29 and 46. On one of them, a bomb that exploded nearby swept away the entire upper crew, gun and machine gun crews. A signalman stood at the helm of the damaged boat, and the scar, covered by the fire of SK 112, continued to follow the set course to the Chersonese Cape. During the shelling, Senior Lieutenant E.A. Korgun, a brave, strong-willed commander and an excellent sailor, was killed. Lieutenant Bulatov took command of the boat. Unfortunately, I can't remember any of the names of the boat crew, as I was together with them for one day. But in my memory they remained forever courageous, self-sacrificing, devoted to the motherland people, who Konstantin Pavlovich told me at the meeting. We approached the Cape of Chersonesos in the darkness. It was difficult to orient ourselves. No buoys, no lights. We approached the berth of the 35th Battery at about 1 a.m. July 2. Noise and shots were heard from the shore. The area where the patrol boats were located, the Germans fired artillery and mortar fire. On the night of June 30, the head of the Floating Means Department of the Soaria, Captain 2nd Rank I.A. Zaruba, received an order from the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Fleet, Captain 1st Rank A.G. Vasiliev, to send all the watercraft to the Caucasus, and what could not leave on its own, to blow up. On all watercraft that were on the move, Zaruba organized the landing of the wounded and sent them to the Caucasus. The floating crane, barges and tugboat had to be sunk. There was nothing to blow them up with. Arriving at the 35th Battery on July 1, I.A., Zaruba found their only Captain 3rd Rank A.D. Ilyashev, who said that after midnight should come minesweepers and patrol boats, but the situation is so tense that it would be very difficult to organize the landing. Zaruba stayed on the battery. At 23 o'clock on July 1, a major from the headquarters of the 109th Rifle Division addressed Zaruba on behalf of Major General Novikov. Major General Novikov asks to help him and his commanders to get to the ship. Ivan Antonovich went to the wounded general, introduced himself to him. With Novikov was about 20 army commanders. With great difficulty they reached the temporary pier. When they went down to it, one of the commanders kept repeating loudly, "Let the wounded General Novikov through." They crossed the plank to the second part of the pier built on consoles from rails embedded in the rock, stopped and waited for the arrival of ships. Among the commanders accompanying General Novikov was Ivan Antonovich Zaruba. He remembers that the pier was packed to capacity. Many of the wounded could not walk. Their right to be taken to the ships first was respected in that difficult situation. July 2 came. From the shore to those waiting on the pier came a multi-voiced noise, shots, bursting shells and mines in the waters of the bay. Suddenly a huge column of fire rose into the night sky, and a few seconds later an explosion rang out. It blew up one of the towers of the 35th Battery. A few minutes later there was a second explosion of the same force. The first patrol boat approached not to the second part of the pier, where General Novikov and a group of commanders were, but to the roll part of it, built directly at the shore. There was a small ripple, and the scar bumped the bow against the pier. People immediately began to jump onto the deck, and a crowd rushed to the pier. Zvezgetkin remembers this moment as follows. On the shore, where the temporary pier was built, a large crowd gathered. When the noise from the sea determined that the ships were coming, and the moon came out and helped to see the manoeuvring patrol boats, everyone was extremely excited. Some of them expressed their joy by shooting in the air and shouting at the arriving sailors. The time was after midnight. Zvezgetkin made his way to the pier with difficulty, but could not get through the dense crowd of people. He heard a plea to give way to the wounded General Novikov. When the first boat approached the shore, the crowd rushed towards it. Several manoeuvring patrol boats were visible from the shore. Zvezgetkin decided that there would be no organized landing. People entered the water. Some stood chest-deep in the water and called for help. They couldn't swim. Many rushed to swim to the manoeuvring boats. Zvezgetkin took off his boots and swam toward a patrol boat approaching the cantilevered pier. The sailors pulled Evgeny Anatolievich onto the deck. He was among the first to be lifted out of the water. Zvezgetkin had not slept for several days, and extremely tired, he immediately went down to the forward cabin, where he was directed by the sailors, threw off his wet uniform, lay down on a vacant bunk and instantly fell asleep. And on the cantilever part of the pier were still commanders together with P.G. Novikov. Ivan Antonovich Zaruba recalls that even the second boat did not approach them, although voices were heard all the time. Come here, received General Novikov. The second patrol boat approached the cliff, from where signals were given. It was Captain 3rd Rank Ilishev calling the ship. Weakened by continuous fighting, the units of the 386th Infantry Division, the 8th, 7th and 9th Marine Brigades put up stubborn resistance, often going into hand-to-hand combat. But the enemy still managed to break through to the junction of the 8th Brigade and 386th Division. Communication with the Soar Command and neighbours was broken. The flagship command post of the Sevastopol defensive area, the command post of the Seaside Army and Coastal Defence were moved to the reserve CP, on the 35th Battery. The 35th Battery was located on the Chersonese Cape and was preparing to defend the main base of the fleet from enemy battleships and line cruisers. There were 4 305mm guns on it, installed in 2 turrets of circular firing. All combat mechanisms, power station, personnel cabins and other auxiliary facilities were located in a concrete massif. The battery also had 45mm guns and machine guns to repel air raids. A branched system of dugouts and trenches was prepared in case of an enemy attack from the land. The battery entered the battle on November 7, 1941, but not against battleships and cruisers, but against Hitler's land army advancing from the north. Almost half-ton shells reached the enemy at a distance of up to 40 kilometers. The enemy, suffering heavy losses from the fire of the battery, tried to suppress it, made group raids of bomber aviation, fired artillery from its large batteries. But the 35th Battery held firm and continued to crush the enemy. By the time of the second assault, in December 1941, the gun barrels were worn out. They were replaced, although each barrel weighed almost 52 tons. Then this experience was applied to the 30th Battery, where they also changed the barrels. After the publication of the book Breakthrough, I received several letters from the commander of the battery, Lieutenant Colonel Reserve A. Yay. IA. Leshenko, and now I can tell more about the last days of the battery. With Alexei Yakovlevich I met many times during the war and in the post-war time, in the days of meetings of participants of the defense of Sevastopol. In the morning of June 30, the commander of the fleet, Vice Admiral FACO Tyabursky, and a member of the Military Council of the Fleet, Divisional Commissar N. Kulikov, arrived at the battery. Having heard a report on the situation, Tyabursky and Kulikov reported by telegram to People's Commissar of the Navy N.G. Kuznetsov, commander of the North Caucasus Front ESM Budyonny, and a member of the Military Council of the Fleet, M. Budyonny, and a member of the Military Council of the Front I, E.S. Isakov. The enemy broke in from the northern side on the Korabelnaya. The pressure by aviation tanks has increased sharply. We believe that in this position we will hold out for 2 or 3 days at the most. I ask you to allow me on the night of July 30 to July 1 to take out by airplanes 200-300 people of responsible workers, commanders to the Caucasus, if possible, to leave Sevastopol myself, leaving here my deputy Major General Petrov, People's Commissar of the Navy, Admiral N.G.A. Kuznetsov, having received the telegram, as he told about it in his book on the fleet's combat alert, reported to Stalin, and having received his consent for the command of the SDF to leave Sevastopol, gave the military council of the fleet and in a copy to Admiral Isakov a telegram. An notification of responsible personnel and your departure to the Caucasus is authorized. After receiving this telegram, a meeting was held, which was attended by Major General I.E. Petrov, Divisional Commissar I.F. Chuknov, Brigade Commissar M.G. Kuznetsov, Commandant of the Coastal Defense and Head of the Garrison of Sevastopol, Major General P.A. Morgunov, Brigade Commissar K.U.S. Vershinin, the Head of the Special Department of the Fleet, Major General N.D.R. Molaev, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Black Sea Fleet, Captain First Rank Ag Vasiliev, Commander of the Ovra Main Base of Sevastopol, Rear Admiral V.G. Fadiev. Okyabursky brought to all the answer of People's Commissar Kuznetsov on the permission to evacuate the responsible employees and reported that to lead the remaining units and cover the evacuation remain Petrov and Morgunov. Members of the Military Council of the Army Chuknov and Kuznetsov and a member of the Military Council of the Navy Kulikov objected. Who to leave? Okyabursky asked Petrov. I. Petrov proposed to leave Major General Novikov, who was in charge of the defense sector of the Chersonese Peninsula, where the 109th Rifle Division, which P.G. Novikov commanded, was fighting. Vice Admiral Okyabursky agreed and instructed Petrov and Morgunov to help organize the evacuation cover before the submarine departure. Assistant to P.G. Novikov on the marine part was left Captain 3rd Rank A. I. Elie Cherfet from the operational group of the fleet headquarters. And Leshenko writes that F.S. Okyabursky, after the meeting, listened to his report. Commander of the 35th Battery reported on the availability of artillery stock. 3 high-explosive 7 armor and 6 shrapnel shells, 40 shells for practical firing. Rifle ammunition and grenades were sufficient for a long defense. After Leshchenko's report, FXAR, Okyabursky gave the battery the task to cover the retreating units and the evacuation of the wounded and civilians. I replied to the commander that the task is clear and will be accomplished, but the thought drilled. What will you repel tank attacks? What will douse the fire of enemy batteries? There was only one hope for our glorious sailors, petty officers and commanders. In any situation they will not be confused, and if they have to die, they will die as heroes. July 1, Major General P.G. Novikov called Leshchenko. Alexei Yakovlevich remembers that this meeting was the second and last. The first took place on June 30 after the departure of the senior staff of the Army and Navy. Major General Novikov was then interested in the state of the battery and the availability of ammunition, and now Pyotr Georgievich ordered Leshchenko together with his commissar to attract fighters and commanders of retreating units of the Maritime Army to defend the 35th Battery to hold out until night, as the minesweepers and boats were to arrive. Leshchenko, together with his commissar Viktor Efimovich Ivanov, organized about 1,000 fighters and commanders on the line, which was 2 kilometers from the battery. Here is what told about the last hours of the 35th Battery A. Leshchenko. White and 19 high explosive and armor-piercing shells were used up to destroy the enemy battery in Sukhanaya Balka. It was in the morning of July 1. Our practical shells were fired at German tanks. 1 tank was destroyed by a direct hit. The case was as follows. The commander of the 18th Battery, Lieutenant Nikolai Dmitriev, asked to drive away the tanks going to the battery, and Leshchenko ordered to load the gun with practical shells, cast iron bolts. The telephonist's face expressed bewilderment, but he transmitted the command as it should be. Fire, the shells fell between the tanks, again salvo on the 6th salvo, a direct hit, and the tank collapsed like a house of cards. At 13 hours, the fascists occupied the battery town, which was 3.5 kilometers from the battery. About 16 o'clock, Hitlerites began an attack on the battery. The nearby pillbox was silenced, a direct hit of a shell. The counter-machine gun from which Leschenko himself was firing became silent. Hitlerites continued to roll up grey shaft. The enemy attack was repulsed by rifle and machine gun. 6 last shrapnel shells were left on the battery. Leschenko rushed into the turret. Commander Yakovlev was preparing the gun to fire. Standing at the helm of horizontal guidance, at the sighting tube, I aimed a gun where I could see a particularly large concentration of enemies. I didn't hear a shot, but at the place where I was aiming, the Germans suddenly disappeared. It was as if they were blown away by the wind. I turned the turret to the left and fired some more shots. It is impossible to convey in words what it is like to fire buckshot from 12-inch guns. You only have to see it. Each shot cost the Nazis hundreds of soldiers and officers, and there were 6 such shots. Leschenko woke up in the sanitary part of the battery. He was severely deafened. The doctor Evgeny Vladimirovich Kazansky told him to lie down, but how could he lie down? Later Leschenko learned that at the last shot shrapnel in the armour of the turret hit an enemy shell, and although it did not penetrate it, but the impact concussed all who were in the turret. After firing buckshot, the survivors of the Hitlerites fled. At 23 hours, Leschenko reported that a large group of German machine gunners broke through the defence, cutting off the right command post of the battery, which was 450 metres from the battery. Leschenko had 30 men from the battery in reserve. The danger of a breakthrough to the tower increased with every hour. We did not say the word battery, as if it was about something extraneous. Together with the commissar of the battery Vivanov, Leschenko came to the inevitable. It was decided to undermine the battery. They were preparing for the explosion even earlier, prepared explosives, 10 large depth bombs, several charges, kilogram TNT cartridges. The commander of the subversive party was a communist chief of combat supply Senior Sergeant Alexei Yakovlevich Pobivanets. The party foreman was a communist Boris Clementivich Melnik. The electric part of the mine subversive party was in charge of a petty officer, communist Mikhail Alexeyevich Vlasov. The party included a storekeeper of combat food Tutinov and sailor Ivanov. The whole party consisted of 12 people. The explosives were laid. It was up to the command. And it was utter. RIP. In his letter, Alexei Yakovlevich Leschenko writes, "It is hard for me even now to think about the fact that the 35th battery does not exist. The order to destroy the battery cost a huge nervous tension and even, I do not hesitate to say, tears." Alexei Yakovlevich's entire service was spent on this battery. In 1929, after graduation from the School of Arms of the Training Detachment, Leschenko was appointed as a gun commander on the 35th Battery. In 1931, he became the foreman of the turret. After passing an external examination for the commander, he became an assistant battery commander. In 1935, he became a turret commander. In 1940, after an advanced training course, he was appointed a battery commander. You can understand what condition was at AY. Leschenko at that difficult moment. Leschenko gave the order at 0, on July 2. The first to be blown up was the right command post of the battery. At 05, the first tower was blown up 10 minutes later. The second, next the central control post of the power station and other auxiliary mechanisms, was blown up. All survivors transferred to the Harpoon, which was left to perform pilotage service to replace the BTS-27. On the 5th day came the end of our pilot service. Recalls the commander of the base minesweeper Harpoon, now retired Captain First Rank G.P. Kokok. Watch signalman Vyacheslav reported. Rad Commander, from Inkerman course to the Ravelin 9 Junkers, the height of 2,000. The leading airplane of 9 Ju-87s, approaching the ship, sharply turned to the left and went into a steep dive. Captain Lieutenant Koka, in the rumble of explosions, saw a bright flame flashed at the half-bank. The commander of the minesweeper regained consciousness on the shore. Nearby were wounded Red Fleet men, petty officers and commanders. Ivan Evsesevich Stikhankov, the commissar of the ship, was killed, and Vasily Kudiakov, the navigator of the ship, was seriously wounded. The battery of the trawler was burning. The commander saw how the rest of the crew heroically saved the ship. The U-87s did not fly away, but at low altitude shot the deck where the sailors and petty officers were fighting the fire, as well as the wall on the shore where the wounded were. The fire on the minesweeper could not be limited, and the danger of explosion of the artillery cellar was increasing with every minute. Thanks to the ingenuity and fearlessness of bosun Ivan Korobkin, who crawled with a fire hose to the cellar, knocked down the fire and poured shells, the danger of explosion passed. Out of 84 crewmen, 18 were wounded. 3 were killed. Severe wounds were received by the commander of BH-5 Yar, Gay Nazarov, and assistant commander of the ship A.A. Makov. Fire of machine guns and cannons from enemy planes put out of action all artillery and bomb armament. There was only one rifle left on the minesweeper, which was used by the watchman at the gangway. The foremast with all armament, with half-bank superstructure of the running bridge, was toppled to the starboard side with an angle of up to 70 degrees. It was impossible to control the ship from the commander's bridge. About 2 square meters of outer plating was torn out on the port side. The hull of the minesweeper in the aft part was deformed. The rudder was damaged. It was swung by 6 people with the help of a steering wheel in the tiller compartment. It was possible to shift the rudder at any change of course, and at turns with the help of only 3 men. In the engine rooms, insulation was crumbling on almost all mains, cracks and fistulas were gaping on the salt and oil wires, but the diesels mostly remained serviceable, so they decided to save the ship and immediately send it to the Caucasus. Headed by Viktor Alexeyevich Samarin, assistant of the flagship mechanic of the OVUA. The crew of the minesweeper within a day restored the electromechanical fighting part and prepared the ship for the passage to the Caucasus. By the efforts of the whole crew, the foremast, with half-tank superstructure of the commander's bridge, was thrown on the wall of the artillery bay, as it was dangerous to go to sea in such a state. From the minesweeper, no. 27 to Harpoon went the navigator Boris Ilvov, the commander of BS-5 Stepan Kablukov, redcoats and petty officers. Burned, without a running bridge, without means of control, with a tightly shifting rudder, without a compass, without communication with the shore, and with 1 rifle harpoon at 23 hours 30 minutes on June 18. Towed by a signer, left Sevastopol. At the traverse of Pisoknaya Bay, the signer gave up the tow. Commander Koka, together with navigator Lvov, took a place at an unusual command post, at the entrance hatch to the tiller compartment. Through a chain of liaisons, the commander controlled the machines. We reached the traverse of the Chersonese lighthouse. Dawn had not yet come. It was expected that Harpoon would go with the convoy, which left Sevastopol at 22 hours. However, the signer towing the Harpoon from the artillery bay was an hour and a half late, and the convoy had time to go far ahead. The commander, having consulted with the navigator, came to the conclusion that the convoy could not catch up. We decided to go independently. Orienting by the polar star, we set a course for Sinop. Before dawn, we saw on the minesweeper the purple glow over Sevastopol. By 12 o'clock on June 19, we approached the traverse of Sinop. From the Harpoon, observed how the coastal battery rotated gun barrels in the direction of the minesweeper. Harpoon began to withdraw towards the sea. 3 Turkish torpedo boats headed toward the mangled ship. On the Harpoon, prepared for the worst, recalls Pavel Zilkin. But the torpedo boats did not approach the minesweeper. Harpoon took a course to Batumi. In the car, people kept watch in difficult conditions. Black smoke was pouring more through the open hatches of engine hoods than through the chimney. Nevertheless, the commanders of the engine room, Ponomarev and Doronin, perfectly withstood the set course. The same flawlessly kept watch at the diesels. In the afternoon of June 19, a German reconnaissance plane appeared. At 14 o'clock, bombers came. From the only rifle fired at the plane's electrician Tikhonov. Signalman Vyacheslav Krasnov watched the actions of bombers, reported from time to time. The mad commander. They broke away from the left. This meant that the plane diving from the left side dropped bombs. There were 3 men on the rudder, and they instantly executed commands, left rudder or right rudder, depending on where the bombs flew. There was not a single hit on the minesweeper. Bombers, having dropped bombs, did not fly away, but machine-gunned us. Wounded and killed appeared among the crew. The dead were buried according to naval custom. The fresh water in the drinking cistern was salted. The food pantry was flooded with water during the fire. Everyone was thirsty and hungry, especially those who were on watch at the diesel engines. On the morning of June 20, MB2, a sea scout discovered the minesweeper, flew up, fired a green rocket, and made 2 circles. Flying over the ship, the pilot waved to us and showed us the direction to our shore. It is difficult to convey the joy we experienced at the sight of our airplane. What only jubilant words we did not shout to the pilot. People smiled, and some of them shed tears of joy. After a while, the Mowed boat appeared. It was sent by the commander of Tuapse Naval Base, Rear Admiral G.V. Zhukov. It was a joyful meeting in Tuapse. I remember how G.V. Zhukov and I arrived at the Harpoon and learned about the courage of the crew, skillful actions of the commanders, wondering how a burned, riddled, poorly controlled minesweeper could reach the base. They could reach the base because there were Soviet sailors, almost all communists and Komsomol members. Pavel Ivanovich Zilkin was later sent to the courses of political workers in Gagri. He was a Komsomol leader, instructor of the political department. He took part in many landing operations. He was awarded battle orders and medals. After the war, he served in the Pacific Fleet. After 15 years, he returned to the Red Banner Black Sea Fleet as deputy chief of the political department of the unit, where he started his service as a Red Fleet. The situation on the Sevastopol front was becoming more complicated every day. Here is what the archival documents tell about the situation near Sevastopol in those days. On June 29, at 2:00 am, the enemy opened heavy artillery and mortar fire on the southern shore of the northern bay in the area of Kilen-plus-Shotka. Power station, simultaneously, enemy bombers made several group raids on the same. At 2 hours 15 minutes, Hitlerites put a smoke screen all over the northern bay, which, due to the weak northern wind, slowly moved to the southern shore of the bay. At 2 hours and 35 minutes, the enemy on dinghies and boats began to transfer the landing force in the direction of Troitskaya, Georgievskaya, and dry gullies. Reflection of the landing force was hampered by a continuous shroud of smoke and dust from bursts of shells, mines, and bombs. Artillerymen of the 177th and 2nd Coastal Defence Divisions, defending this section of the southern coast, sank some of the boats and launches before they approached the shore, but most of the enemy's watercraft reached the shore and landed the landing force. About 3 a.m., the posts of the 3rd Artillery Division of the Coastal Defence and observers of the 1st Sector discovered 12 motor schooners. They came out of Yalta with the landing force and went from Cape Aya in the direction of the Chersonese Cape. It was already a direct threat to the Chersonese airfield. Battery No. 18 under the command of Senior Lieutenant N. I. Dmitriev on the Traverse of St. George Monastery sank 9 schooners, and 3 went to sea. At 4:00, the enemy, preparing for an attack, opened artillery fire on the defence lines of I and II sectors. On height 75.0, Sapun Mountain, height Karagakh, and the village of Kardikovka. This was a preparation for a decisive attack. The enemy artillerymen were joined by aviation. Groups of 30 to 120 airplanes intensively bombed the area. At 5 hours 30 minutes, the enemy in 2 groups supported by tanks went on the offensive. From the area of Fedukini Heights moved parts of the 170th Plough Division of the Germans from Novi Shuley-Dubol, parts of the 18th Infantry Division of the Romanians. The Germans went in the direction of Sapun Gora and Komutove Balka, and the Romanians to height 75.0 and Farm Digachi. In the 2nd Echelon, the enemy held in reserve 72nd Infantry Division. Day and evening did not subside fierce fighting along the entire front from the northern bay to Karagakh. Our aviation at night made 21 sorties to the enemy positions. 7 fighters covered the Chersonese airfield, where transport planes continued to arrive. 3 I-16s flew out to attack any troops, half an hour after the towing the steering control was corrected on the Georgia. The approach point was reached at 22:02. Pilot Base Minesweeper No. 27, commanded by Lieutenant Captain A.M. Ratner, was supposed to meet the convoy. But, looking for it, the minesweeper went out more seaward and separated from the arriving ship. Convoy Commander Gerngross, being confident in his lay, independently led the convoy along the fairway among the minefield. Over the HFF, Gerngross contacted Ratner and explained to him that he had taken responsibility for guiding the ships. Knowing fairway, the ships rearranged in a prearranged order. BTS Shield went head, Harpoon guarded the ship from the stern, and boats lined up on the starboard and port side of the Georgia. As the raids continued, but with single planes. One of the bombs again fell near the Georgia. This time the main engine failed. Then the Shield took the Georgia in tow and drove it for 40 minutes, until the Georgia was transferred to the Shield. Please give me back the tugboat. I will be able to go on my own small way. On the Inkerman lock we lay down about 6 a.m. on June 13. It was already light. On the traverse of Kamashiva Bay, 3 torpedo boats. Smoke screeners at full speed went out on a course to the north, crossed the Inkermansky Bay, turned to the left towards the sea, and began to put a smoke screen covering the convoy from the north, from the Kachinsky direction, from where Hitlerites could conduct aimed artillery fire. We passed the line of the side barrier. The duty officer on the roadstead transmitted in megaphone, to which berth to moor. The Georgia was ordered to moor at the passenger wharf, the Shield was directed to the Kolodilnik, and the Harpoon to the Coal Wharf. Shield and Harpoon turned to the southern bay, and were walking quite close when the signalman Radchenko loudly announced, 5 junkers are coming at us from the south. Shield gave full speed ahead. Georgia could not maneuver. The U-87s went into a dive. From the bridge of the Shield was seen as the heavy mast of Georgia slowly rose in the air, and, inverted, fell into the water. When the haze cleared, the Georgia was already sinking. The boats were taking people off, picking up those who were holding on to the water. In the following days and nights, divers took out ammunition, weapons, food and medicines from the sunken Shield approached the station wharf. No sooner had we finished mooring than 5 U-87s began to dive on the minesweeper. Our fighters selflessly threw themselves at the enemy bombers. Bombs were falling around the minesweeper. Several pieces of shrapnel penetrated the hull. A shrapnel pierced the board and the desk in the commissar's cabin. It was enough to hit one shrapnel in the crate with bottles, and Shield would be engulfed in fire. Commissar Nikita Pavlovich Savoshenko was among the gun crew. His presence calmed people, gave them confidence. Just in case of emergency party, headed by Bozin Chishov, was at the ready. Junkers flew away. The team of the minesweeper quickly selected the remains of the mooring ropes broken during the bombardment, and Shield moved to the northern bay, to the coal wharf. Lieutenant M.M. Sotnikov, the assistant commander of the minesweeper, organized the unloading of the dangerous cargo. Sailors and petty officers ran to carry the crates with bottles away from the minesweeper. All the tarpaulin was used to camouflage the ship. Shield stayed in Sevastopol another day, eliminated major damage, took the wounded, and with the onset of darkness on June 14 went to Novorossiysk. However, all the damages could not be eliminated during the anchorage. On the way the steering control failed several times, but the crew of the minesweeper overcame all difficulties and the Shield returned safely to Novorossiysk. I learned about the fate of the base minesweeper now. 27 from Pavel Ivanovich Zhilkin, now captain of the second rank of the reserve. During the war years he served on the BTS-27 as a commodore. Chief officer of the group of commodores, was the secretary of the Komsomol organization of the minesweeper. Pavel Ivanovich was accepted as a member of the CPSU on the basis of his combat recommendation. It was written down that Zhilkin shot down a torpedo boat with the first shot. And everything happened like this. Zhilkin, together with the Commodore Alexei Morozov on April 30, 1942, was on watch at the bow gun. The watchman noticed the torpedo carrier and, without waiting for the announcement of the alarm, opened fire and shot it down. Pavel Ivanovich told that BT-87 often went to besieged Odessa, escorting transports. On the way back they took the wounded, providing them with cabins, bunks and commanders' quarters. In besieged Sevastopol, BT-27 performed pilot service, provided night meeting and escorting transports and ships, as during the day the enemy shelled the fairway with artillery fire. This BT-27 repulsed the attack of enemy torpedo boats. When the destroyer Svobodny and the ship Abkhazia passed June 10 narrow fairway to Sevastopol. In my memory, I have forever preserved the events associated with the loss of the BT-27, recalls Pavel Zhilkin. In those days, the minesweeper had to change its anchorage 3-4 times a day. The enemy aviation was literally searching for our ships. On June 13, BT-27 was going to the Phelant area. An enemy scout flew by. Some time later, a chain of U-87s came to the ship from the sea at an altitude of 3,000 meters. Signalman Semyon Pustov counted 20. Many people on the minesweeper heard the signalman's report that 27 planes were flying. Just the number of our minesweeper. We increased our speed. All anti-aircraft guns opened barrage fire. The firing didn't stop the dive bombers. One of the bombs hit the forward engine room. The entire watch, led by Petty Officer First Article Ivan Sheshabina, the ship's partorg, was killed. The diesel engine stopped. Only the stern machine worked. One junkers was shot down. The attacks of the others followed one after another. The second bomb hit the aft gun. The whole crew was killed. The rudder jammed in the left to port position. It started to circulate. This, to some extent, prevented the aiming dive. Bombs exploded near the minesweeper. The commander of the minesweeper Ratna was seriously wounded by a shrapnel. Senior Lieutenant Sergei Grebelnikov took command. Commissioner Senior Political Officer Abramtsev was also badly wounded, lost a lot of blood, could not move. The commander of BC-23, Lieutenant Turabotchin, both legs were broken. Junkers left. BTS-27, continuing to slowly circulate, began to sink. In the holes came overboard water, worked all the water-draining ship's means, but they did not save the situation. The commander, the commissar, the commander of BS-23, petty officers Ivan Kirillov, Zora Sukhanov, a total of 14 people, loaded on a dinghy. In order not to take extra rowers, the dinghy was already full, the wounded took to rowing themselves. Sasha Geldiashvili, the severely wounded miner, bandaged a laceration in his side with a calf skin and sat down at the oars. The dinghy did not reach the shore 10 meters because of the hole and sank. Sasha Geldiashvili pulled ashore the commander and the commissar, who could not move independently. In the hospital on Fialant, on the operating table, Sasha Geldiashvili died. Senior Lieutenant Sergei Grebelnikov, having consulted with the navigator Senior Lieutenant Boris Lvov and the commander of BS-5 engineer Senior Lieutenant Sabirov, decided to leave the ship. The minesweeper could not go ashore. To all wounded and concussed, in addition to lifebelts, tied cork mattresses. To tow the wounded to the shore were entrusted to the remaining on the ship Red Fleet men and petty officers. As soon as the ship stopped running, the minesweeper tilted sharply to starboard, and then Senior Lieutenant Grebenikov ordered everybody off the ship. But not everyone managed to leave the ship. Part of the personnel died as the minesweeper, in addition to bombing, was shelled and enemy artillery from Balaclava Heights. On the emergency scaffolding, on cork mattresses, the sailors held on until the arrival of boats. Some swam themselves to the shore at the 35th Battery. Pavel Zhilkin was among the swimmers. As soon as the minesweepers left Novorossiysk, the sailors, replacing each other, changed into uniforms of the first term, although there was no command to do so from the bridge. During the June campaigns on many ships that went to the besieged Sevastopol, the sailors observed this tradition of the Russian Navy. At dusk, Traun approached the approach point of the fairway. In the keel went Mina. At Cape Fiorent, we pressed to the very shore as close as we could pass. Approaching the Chersonis Cape, the ships lay on a course to the Bay Strelitskaya. From the bridge we could see the flashes of gun salvos and fire trails from the northern side. The enemy's searchlights were trotting across the sky and the coast. Sevastopol was burning. After midnight moored in Streltskaya Bay. The ships were met by Captain 3rd Rank Alexei Ivanovich Ivanov. The Siberians quickly disembarked. Sailors warmly said goodbye to the Red Army men, with whom they had made friends during the passage from Novorossiysk. The Siberians were met by representatives of the 142nd Brigade Command. The same night, the arrived soldiers left for the positions occupied by the brigade. Ammunition was loaded immediately on cars. Everything was done in the dark. The bay and the coast were shelled by the enemy artillery without interruption, but the unloading of ammunition did not stop for a minute. Boris Pavlovich recalls how he went to the dugout, where there was a command post for the protection of the water area, Ovra. The coast was riddled with bomb and shell craters. On the territory of the bay coast, there was not a single whole building left. At the CP Favorsky learned that Tashkent arrived in Kamishevaya Bay, and the destroyer Bezuprechny was sunk by enemy aircraft. Finished unloading ammunition, began to receive people. On the ship took 230 wounded, about half of them seriously wounded. Many were sick with dysentery. The ship took preventive measures and none of the crew got sick. In addition to the wounded, the trail took a group of Sevastopol residents, mostly women and children. In total, together with the wounded, there were about 300 people on the ship. The ship's rooms and deck were filled so that the personnel of combat posts with great difficulty had to get to their places at the guns and machine guns. The commander of the minesweeper minor Senior Lieutenant V.K. Steshenko reported to Favorsky that the unloading was finished and the wounded were taken to the ship. At 1 hour 53 minutes on June 27, the ships left Strelskaya Bay. Traal again went in the lead in the keel of the Mina. They went the same way as they came in, under the very shore. This camouflaged the minesweepers. At 4 a.m., we went beyond the outer edge of the mines and lay down on a course to the southeast, with the expectation to get as far away from the shore as possible. At AM, signals detected 2 Heinkels flying at high altitude. A few minutes later from the bridge they saw how the planes turned to the BTS. The anti-aircraft gunners of the minesweepers opened fire, and the Heinkels turned northward. In 30 minutes, 2 torpedo carriers appeared at low altitude, and behind them, at an altitude of 2,000 meters, a group of U-87s followed in a wedge. The trawlers increased the distance between them to be able to maneuver. The U-87s began diving in threes from a height of 2,000 meters and came out of the dive from a height of 500 meters. While diving, the planes fired cannons and machine guns at the ships. There were wounded and killed on the decks. The minesweepers were firing continuously from all firing points. It was time to test BC-5. We gave full speed. Maneuvering, minesweepers dodged direct hits. 1 bomb fell 15 meters to the left on the bow of the trawler. Cascades of water rained down on the deck. The blast wave tore the ship to the right, and the trawler began to describe the circulation. The rudder from the hydraulic impact jammed. The next bombs again fell near the ship and damaged the gyrocompass and tore the magnetic compasses out of place. The rudder control post was out of order. Through a breach in the bow came in outside water. Shrapnel pierced the left fuel tank. The fuel went overboard, leaving an oily trail behind the stern. Radio equipment stopped working from the ship's hull, shaking. Communication with the shore was lost. The ship had a trim in the bow and a small roll on the port side. During these difficult hours for the trial, the drills and training in the fight for the ship's survivability, conducted in due time by the commander of BH-5 Peter Grigorievich Sergeyev, had their full effect. In Mikhail Babin's hands, the hand wheel of the manual emergency control station was as obedient as on the bridge. Quickly and accurately carrying out the commander's orders, Babin timely dodged the ship from the bombs. Makarov, the commander of the bilge department, leading the emergency party, was able to quickly reinforce the stops of the forward bulkheads, seal the breaches and start pumping out the water. The water did not arrive, but decreased. The ship's chief petty officer of the electricians group PSI Zayats, with electricians Chernyshev and Vyazovsky, repaired the damage and set up power supply to the battle stations. Each crew member confidently did his job and firmly knew that by repairing the damage at his battle stations, he was fighting for the survivability and combat effectiveness of the ship. The wounded, placed in the inner rooms, heard the continuous explosions and firing, felt the shaking of the ship's hull and, naturally, were nervous. And when they saw that the water from the deck comes into the cabin where they were lying, they decided that the ship was hit and they were forgotten. Then those who could move climbed up the gangway to the deck. A traffic jam was created as there was no free space on the deck, and the work of the emergency parties was disrupted. Then the ship's commissar Vasily Ivanovich Tarabarin had to take measures. With the help of commanders and Red Fleet men, he quickly brought order, calmed the wounded. All who were on the upper deck saw how skillfully and selflessly sailors act during the raid of enemy aircraft, quickly repair the damage occurring on the ship, and those of the lightly wounded passengers who could help in some way also joined the combat work. They dragged machine-gun boxes with ammunition, shells to the guns. The paint on the gun barrels from prolonged firing bubbled and burned. The wounded poured water on the barrels. And how great was the joy of the exhausted people when they saw one of the Nazi bombers, coming out of the dives, went up in smoke. The raids continued until 6 hours and 11 minutes. The base minesweeper miner also had a hard time. At times the minesweeper disappeared from view. It was the columns of water hiding it from the eyes of sailors watching Mina from the bridge of Trana. The crew of the miner, as well as the personnel of the trail, skillfully repulsed enemy aircraft attacks and on the move repaired damage from bombs bursting near the ship. In 16 hours and 26 minutes, there was no raid. During these hours the work on Tral was boiling. Everyone who could eliminated numerous damages. Navigator Vasily Kudyakov had to remember the old ways of navigation. We followed the sun. Radio operators Nikolai Lepetin and Alexander Bondarenko put a new antenna and managed to restore radio communication with the shore. The commander requested permission to proceed to Tuapse as it was risky to enter the fairways of Novorossiysk without a compass. At 6-2 Heinkel's appeared again from the north. They dropped bombs. Fortunately, they fell aside from the minesweeper. That was the last raid. At nightfall, as soon as the polar star appeared, the minesweepers laid down on a course to harsh trials fell to the share of the base minesweeper Shit, whose commander was Vladimir Mikhailovich Gerngross, now retired captain first rank. By that time, the crew of the minesweeper already had a great experience in combat. They cleared minefields, laid new fairways, participated in evacuation of rearguard units from Odessa. In one of the passages on board the ship had to take more than 400 passengers. Shield was also among the first ships that broke into the port of Feodossia, with a landing party on board on December night of 1941. On June 11, 1942, Shield, together with 5 hunting boats, left Tuapse, escorting the motor ship Georgia, which received replenishment, ammunition, food and medical supplies. They were heading southwest to the Anatolian coast, passing along the Turkish coast, turned north, taking a course to Sevastopol. The navigator of the base minesweeper Oleg Alexandrovich Kuiko was accurately counting. Shield took on board a large number of crates filled with Molotov cocktails to fight tanks. Showers, auxiliary rooms were stuffed to the brim with this cargo. On June 12 at 17 o'clock, the convoy caught up with the BTS Harpoon, where the commander was Lieutenant Commander Grigory Petrovich Kocher and Commissar Senior Political Officer Ivan Evsevich Sygankov. Harpoon, by the decision of the commander of the OVA, Rear Admiral V.G. Fadiev, was to be on scheduled preventive maintenance from June 11. According to the rules of mechanical service after 500 hours of engine life, the minesweeper was to be put on a 3-day preventive repair. However, the situation in those days did not allow to observe the prescribed norms. Harpoon was sent to reinforce the convoy. The enemy reconnaissance found the ship on June 12 at 19 hours 37 minutes. 9 junkers dropped bombs 50 miles from the approach point No. 3. To minesweepers and gunboats, manoeuvring opened fire and knocked the Ju-88 off its combat course. The bombs fell away from the Georgia. Lieutenant Mandel managed the fire on the Shield well. Commanders Danko, Levitsky, Sarev and machine gunner Saryuk coped with their duties perfectly. The raid lasted about an hour. There were no direct hits, although 4 bombs fell not far from the ship. The commander of the Shield VM Gerngross was informed that the aft part of the Georgia was getting overboard water and the steering control was damaged. The malfunction was quickly eliminated, and the convoy continued its course to Sevastopol. With the onset of darkness, the ships were attacked twice by German torpedo bombers. The first to notice them boats and immediately opened frontal fire tracer shells. Torpedo carriers were forced to drop all 8 torpedoes early, and this time there were no direct hits. Vladimir Mikhailovich recall. We were then first convinced that the German torpedoes, having passed the distance, obviously, when diving, self-explode, and the force of the hydraulic impact was so great that it seemed as if the torpedoes exploded very close. After the first explosions, the commander of BC-5 Ivan Mefodievich Samofalov sent an emergency party to inspect the lower compartments of the minesweeper to see if there were any holes. On the motor ship, Georgia compasses and battle radio went out of order. Steering control failed again. The commander of the Shield transmitted on VHF the order to the commander of the BTS Harpoon to take the ship in tow. The time was past midnight when Skrinnikov received the order to prepare for the flight. The SO command, headed by Vice Admiral F.A.O. Kotyabsky, with difficulty made their way to the Light 2. With this airplane were to leave with the commander of the 3rd Special Air Group, Colonel G.G. Buba, and Military Commissar Regimental Commissar B.A. Mikhailov. The situation was so that at the airfield gathered a lot of people who wanted to get on the plane. Skrilnikov's plane was the last. Knowing this, Boris Yevgenyevich Mikhailov, in order to avoid the fuss that could happen, decided to stay on the Chersonese. Comrades, I'm staying for the acceptance of airplanes. These words Mikhailov calmed people. The former head of the mobile radio station, Petty Officer, 1st Article G.P. Brukovitsky, well remembers how people reacted to the commissar's action. The next day after the departure of the last Lai-2, a wounded sailor, who was at the airfield when Skrinnikov's plane left, told Brukovitsky about what he had seen. "These are what kind of people we have." The wounded man finished his story. After all, he knew that there would be no more airplanes, but he himself stayed and gave the opportunity to fly away to others. And the sailor, whose arm was torn off, suddenly cried. On July 1, 1942, at 5 a.m., Li-2 arrived in Krasnodar with the command of the Sevastopol defensive area. The deputy chief of the political department of the Black Sea Fleet, Brigade Commissar I.V. Maslov, and Colonel G. Dezuba told me about the dedication of Commissar Boris Evgenyevich Mikhailov. I was familiar with B. E. Mikhailov from my joint service in the Pacific Fleet. At that time, Boris Evgenyevich was the commissar of an aviation regiment. At the fleet meetings and seminars, we used to cite his organizational experience of party political work as an example. In a short period of time, Mikhailov mastered the flying business. He understood that it is necessary to influence the formation of aviators and personal example. The flight characteristic of B.M. Zimeshemev. Mikhailov says a piloting technique on the airplane MBA-2 in the air worked out perfectly. The technique of takeoff landing calculation worked out well. The war caught Mikhailov as a commissar of a bomber regiment in the Baltic. Here is what the commissar of the Air Force of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet L. Pernick wrote about him. With a fiery word and personal example, he inspires pilots, technicians, and mechanics to selflessly carry out combat orders of the command. Commissar Mikhailov is able to explain in a few words the difficulty of the situation, to enthuse people to the feat. As for himself, in air battles B.E., Mikhailov always goes to the most difficult tasks. In early 1942 B.E., Mikhailov was appointed commissar of the 2nd Aviation Brigade of the Black Sea Fleet Air Force. With his arrival, increased combat activity of the brigade, improved work on the study and propaganda of combat experience of advanced pilots. Once being in the brigade, Mikhailov appealed to me with a request to send him on a hot case. I understood him. In those days, when meeting with political officers of units on the Caucasian coast, I often heard requests to be sent to besieged Sevastopol. In May 1942, Mikhailov was appointed commissar of the 3rd Special Aviation Group of the Sevastopol Defense Area. In the days of June fully manifested the organizational talent of the commissar. He had time everywhere and found time to bomb the front line of the enemy. In the well-known to many readers story by Leonid Sobolev Battalion of 4-1 of the 4, Mikhail Negriba was together with Commissar Mikhailov at the Chersonese airfield after the departure of the last Lai-2. Mikhailov remained a true commissar to the end, being there where it was difficult. Leading the struggle of those who remained at Chersonesos, he served as an example of fearlessness and courage. Negriba told about the last minutes of life of the mortally wounded commissar. Nowadays on Chersonese, where Mikhailov died, there is a bust of the winged commissar, and in Sevastopol one of the streets is named after him. Crimeans also remember the glorious military deeds of now Major General of Aviation K. Denisov, who defended the skies of the Crimea. Motherland highly appreciated the exploits of the pilot, awarding him 17 orders and medals and conferring the title Hero of the Soviet Union. A beautiful village near Simferopol is named after him. In Denisovka, there is always a holiday when the famous pilot comes here. He, a welcome guest, who continues to serve in the Navy and gives all his strength and combat experience to further strengthen the military power of the armed forces of our fatherland. In the old custom is presented with bread and salt, and the pioneers lined up for a solemn ruler and report on their deeds. I told about the combat flights of only some pilots who took part in the defense of Sevastopol, although it would be possible to tell a lot about the heroes' aviators, because during the war in the aviation of the Black Sea Fleet, 60 people became heroes of the Soviet Union. In the June days of 1942, the base minesweepers, Shield, Blast, Trawl, Mine, Defender, did not know any rest. They, as well as destroyers and submarines, delivered to the besieged Sevastopol everything necessary and took out the wounded. During the war years, the basic minesweepers turned into universal warships. They not only trawled, but also laid mines, shelled the coast occupied by the enemy, performed convoy service, took part in the landing of troops. There is not a single type of combat operations of surface ships which would not take part in BTH. Toilers of the sea were called in the Navy all those who were on watch on minesweepers. The combat actions of minesweepers of the Saltwater Area Protection, which kept Sevastopol fairways safe until the last days, are highly appreciated. This is an assessment not only of the Black Sea Fleet Command, but also of all the commanders of ships, captains of vessels of the Azov Black Sea Shipping Company, who went to the besieged base. Bettish Defender was awarded the title of Guards, and Shield, Trail, Anchor, Arseny Ruskin were awarded with the Order of the Red Banner. Hitler writes knew that at night in blockaded Sevastopol and its bays enter warships and transport ships, and carefully watch the entrance gates. When lights were lit, indicating the course of our ships, the enemy dropped magnetic mines on the fairway and began artillery fire. Control trawling along the Transaxon fairway had to be done both day and night. To the honour of sailors Sevastopol over, which was commanded by an experienced commander Rear Admiral Vladimir Fediev, Sevastopol fairway was always clean. On June 26, Bettish took on board in Novorossiysk the last unit from the 142nd Rifle Brigade. Having also loaded 21 tons of ammunition, the commander of the trawler, Senior Lieutenant B. Favorsky, was ordered to deliver everything to Streltskaya Bay, and on the return voyage, as always, to take the wounded. This was the fourth trip of Traul to besieged Sevastopol in June. Together with the Traul went out Betia Shemina, where the commander was Senior Lieutenant V.K. Steshenko. Mina also took ammunition, food and medicines. B.P. Fusky, for more camouflage transition of the ship's radio station, was ordered to work on the transmission only in especially important cases. Boris Pavlovich Favorsky, together with the Commissar Senior Political Officer V.I. Tarabarin, decided before the campaign to distribute among the crew all small arms available on the ship. Boxes with grenades from the artillery storehouse were moved to the cabins. The whole crew studied the device of a hand grenade and its handling. During the last days on shore, they practiced throwing dummy grenades more than once. Everyone knew how difficult the situation was in which the ship would find itself when it arrived in Streltsy Bay. Not infrequently there were cases when the personnel of the ships put out of service went ashore to the Marines. At the end of June, at Konstantinovsky, Ravelin Hitlerites installed searchlights and conducted not only artillery bombardment of the Streltsy Bay area, but also launched mortars and large-caliber machine guns. Assist torpedo boats and aviation were patrolling the sea around the clock and attacked any ship. Therefore, each trip to Sevastopol bays required from the commanders and personnel of the huge tension of all forces, high combat skill and military valor. Naval officers, petty officers, commanders and political workers understood that Sevastopol drew away the forces of the enemy, rushing to the Caucasus, to the east, knew that the steadfastness and persistence in the battles for Sevastopol prevent the realization of the plan of the summer offensive of Hitler's command. And all of us, who were engaged in the organization of Sevastopol food supply, were convinced that everyone who went to help Sevastopol residents in those days was ready to fulfill his duty to the end. While working on the manuscript about the courage of Sevastopol defenders, I asked to remember the last trip to Streltsky Bay of the former commander of the Red Banner Bettish Traul B.P. Favorsky. Nowadays he has a peaceful watch. He works as a senior pilot of Ventspils seaport. Boris Pavlovich sent me several letters. The Favorsky's whole life is connected with the sea. He joined the Navy in 1933 on a ticket from the Leningrad Regional Komsomol Committee, graduated from the Franz Higher Naval School. He sailed as a navigator, and during the war years he commanded a minesweeper. I am happy that in the difficult years of war for the motherland, I was entrusted to command a wonderful group of sailors, writes B.P. Favorsky. To this day, Boris Pavlovich keeps in touch with his comrades in arms. He told me about many glorious sailors of the minesweeper in his letters. Motorist Nikolai Petrovich Startsev was a shell carrier. In one of the last trips of the minesweeper, he was hit by a bomb shrapnel and fell at the cannon. The cannon was named after Nikolai Startsev. Yakov Pavlovich Makarov, the ship's commissar, was among the first to volunteer for the Marines. He was wounded near Odessa. He was cured, returned to the ship, and was a permanent comsorg of the ship. The steering department was commanded by Petty Officer of the second article, Mikhail Gavrilovich Babin. If it were not for him, Boris Pavlovich recalls, I would not have had to write this letter. Not once he skillfully led the ship out from under torpedoes and bombs. Favorsky warmly remembers the most sharp signallers. Reshov, Orlov, rangefinder Loginov. Boris Pavlovich writes about his direct assistants, navigators Kudyakov and Bobruk, always and especially in the last campaigns when Cape Sarike was already captured by Hitlerites and beacons on Phalant and Chersonese were not burning. Navigators still as confidently guided the ship. The commander of BH-2, Yakov Petrovich Volkov, after the war commanded a division of minesweepers, cleared the Black Sea from mines. Now he is in the Kherson Maritime School, leads the practice of cadets, and often remembers the combat deeds of his friends. Boris Pavlovich writes about the Red Army and commanders of the 142nd Infantry Brigade. Not having had time to get properly settled on the ship, they asked to indicate the place where they could install machine guns and anti-tank guns to repel attacks of enemy aircraft and torpedo boats. The Siberians were taut, businesslike. In the eyes of these people who went to the aid of Sevastopol, there was no